You're welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. The much-awaited report on the rebased gross domestic product and the updated consumer price index is due by the end of January 2025. The Statistician General of the Federation, Adeyemi Adeniran, announced this when officials from the Gambia Bureau of Statistics visited the agency on a study visit. Arise correspondent Frank Omalape reports.
The National Bureau of Statistics is set to announce the official release of the rebased GDP and Consumer Price Index reports. Statistician General Adeyemi Adeniran says the updated report on GDP and Consumer Price Index will reflect significant transformations in Nigeria's economy, including the emergence of sectors such as the marine and blue economy, digital innovations, creative industries, and e-commerce.
A lot of consultation has been taking place, and we are still doing that until the data is released. I want to say that on behalf of the National Bureau of Statistics and the entire Nigerian statistical system, we thank the federal government for supporting us to where we are, and that is what is making other countries to come and visit us. So we are looking at the end of January 2025. The result of the rebasing will come out.
The meeting, which brought together statisticians and data experts, also witnessed a delegation from the Gambia Bureau of Statistics, who are in Nigeria on a study tour to the National Bureau of Statistics. Adeniran says the NBS Agriculture and Labor Force Survey will serve as a model for the Gambia Bureau of Statistics team. On its part, the Statistician General of the Gambia says the lessons learned from Nigeria's experience in managing large-scale data collection will be instrumental in the Gambia's upcoming National Agricultural Sample Census and Labor Force Survey.
As you may recall, we revised our methodology of computing labor force and labor market statistics in recent times. And we said at that time that it's perfectly in conformity with ILO standard, international standard that all countries are using. And now, as attestation to that, the Gambia Bureau of Statistics is coming to learn how we are able to change, to accommodate the new methodology and start producing database on that.
We made consultations with our development partners, that is the World Bank. They did the research for us. They found out that Nigeria is the best place where we can go to study how the quarterly labor force survey and the agricultural census is being conducted. And Nigeria is a big country in Africa, and therefore its position is critical in moving statistics forward in Africa.
As the NBS prepares to unveil a new picture of Nigeria's economy by January ending, Nigerians are hoping that this will not only redefine the nation's economic trajectory, but impact on living conditions. Frank Omalape, Arise News.
Well, for the developmental implications of all of that, we're now being joined by Professor Ikechukwu, who's a senior fellow at the Nnamdi Azikiwe University in Awka and Executive Director, Development Specs Academy, Abuja, Nigeria. Good morning, Prof. Good to see you again on the morning show.
Good morning. Good to be here. Good to see you guys.
All right, good to have you. Prof, let's get straight into it because of time. Nigeria is proposing, as you're aware, since July of last year, a $1 trillion economy by 2030. If we were discussing 2030 in July of 2023 or even July of last year, it will look like it's a long time. But here we are in January of 2025, and it is less than 5 years to be here. So it is almost upon us. How will you assess the whole point of the desire and the plans of the Nigerian government, which Vice President Kashim Shettima, of course, reiterated just a few days ago in Davos? How will you assess our moves? Are they steady? Are they wobbly? How will you describe them towards these very high dreams? And then what will be in it for an average Nigerian? An average Nigerian who at this point is struggling, an average Nigerian who sees 47 0.8 trillion naira budget, is thinking about a possibility of 100 trillion naira budget next year, but then is still struggling to cope with present realities. So therefore, two things. How ready are we for $1 trillion economy? And what does it mean really for an average Nigerian?
If you're preparing for $1 trillion economy, there are stages. The first thing is desire. You desire $1 trillion economy. The second question is it feasible? In other words, looking around you, looking at the economic activities you have, looking at the quality of human capital, looking at the political orientation of that nation, is it feasible? For Nigeria, it is desirable. For Nigeria, it is feasible. The third point would be, will it be a viable venture? In other words, looking around us, seeing everything, if we take the steps recommended to head towards $1 trillion economy, will it work? The answer is yes, if the right things are done. The final and most critical point is, would it be sustainable even after you've gotten there? And my response is, if you put the necessary checks and balances in place, if you have the proper feedback system, if you have monitoring and control and compliance enforcement, yes, it will be sustainable. So on the face of it, there's nothing wrong with what the Vice President has said. What will need to happen is for that statement to go beyond being a declaration to the reality that people can live with. The projection is for 2030. Like you said, correctly, that's not a long time from now. What it means is between now and that time, the right things will have to be done. Concerning the average Nigerian, you said the Nigerian is suffering. The Nigerian has always been suffering. In every nation of the world, no matter how fine everything is, there are always some people suffering. And also, even before I take that up, when you speak of $1 trillion economy, you're talking about an economy that will be $1 trillion, but within which there will be price fluctuations and all other dynamics, such that what you have, for instance, at 10 naira today, you may have it at 15 naira tomorrow. That 15 naira will impact the perception of what you called, what you think is still $1 trillion economy. But coming to the average person, what needs to happen is that budgetary declarations, budgetary enactments, because every budget is a law, ought to impact the lives of citizens where they can see the impact. If prices are within reach, if incomes can actually serve as genuine income that can feed a family and enable it pick all its bills, if social and utility services are available, electricity is there, water is there, the roads are not bad, and the services like electricity are affordable, then you would say it's impacting the people. But what must be said for now is that if, for instance, you take last year's budget, the official submission we hear is that it had a 25% performance. If that is correct, then that means it was a failed budget. And when you speak of failure in an exam, it's not 0% if you score below 40. So if you went to an exam and scored 25, you don't even have a chance of what you might call a receipt. You do that course all over again, one full session. Having noted that it had 25% performance, somebody has to tell us what happened to the money budgeted. Is it sitting somewhere that it wasn't used? That is 75%. Why was it not executed? Is part of it due to negligence? Those are questions that must be answered. But coming out to the substantive issue you raised, $1 trillion economy is desirable, is feasible, is viable within the Federal Republic of Nigeria and for the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Once the right policies are put in place, once the required political will is sustained and not just announced. So I see no reason to disagree with what the Vice President has said. I really would think it's probably a call to duty and a call to action. For all institutions of state, for all statesmen, for everybody interested in what will go well for our country, to help make that a reality, provided the government itself is setting the right paradigms and not just speaking and then going to sit down.
Well, thank you for that submission. And it brings me to my next question, which is focused on debt management and as vis-a-vis our economic growth. When we look at Nigeria's public debt as it stands, it's now exceeding 142.3 trillion naira. Many fear that the country is walking on a very financial tightrope. Looking at Vice President Shettima advocating for partnerships rather than debt debt-based relationships. What steps can the current administration take to realistically balance the need for funding transformative projects, but with the risk of not escalating a debt distress? Is there a middle ground where borrowing becomes a tool for growth rather than a burden that the citizens are left with?
Yes, borrowing can be the best tool for growth anywhere in the world, in any circumstance. First of all, let's endorse the request or the desire for partnership rather than borrowing or debt. On the question of borrowing and, if you like, economic improvement, if I go to a bank and borrow 200,000 naira, and I want to use it to carry out a naming ceremony for my nephew, I'm borrowing for consumption. I may be jobless. If the bank gives me that money and I spend it, in addition to whoever and whatever I was owing before I borrowed that money, I've increased my debt by 200,000 naira. So the question is not whether a nation is borrowing, but whether what is borrowing for. If the federal government goes to borrow $1 trillion from anywhere in the world, and with that $1 trillion, all roads in Nigeria are in good shape, there's regular power supply, mostly coming from renewable energy, that is, what do you call it now, solar, etc. And that money goes into the revitalization of hospitals and the training of personnel. You find that because of the borrowing of that $1 trillion, what you've got is a nation that works. What you've got is citizens that drive on good roads. What you have is transport companies that now spend 10% of what they used to spend on car maintenance, because when you're driving on bad roads, your shock absorbers are being damaged, your tie rod ends are being damaged, engine settings are being damaged, the bodywork is getting wobbly. You import a car from outside this country that's 30 years old, it doesn't make a sound when it's moving. You get one that's been driven here for 7 years, as it's going, you're hearing squeaks, chick, chick, and all sorts of things. So now those are the gains that we don't look at. If I make 2 million in 3 months from my road transport company, and I spend more than 1.1 million on it on maintenance, if the roads are good, I may not spend more than 300,000 within the same period. Those are some of the issues. So the point I'm making here is that borrowing is not a problem. You borrow to take a chieftaincy title, you're consuming, you're endangering yourself. You borrow to expand your farm so that by next farming season, instead of bringing out 500 tubers of yam, you bring 2 million tubers of yam. That is the right kind of development to make. So I'm not one to quarrel that government is borrowing. No. Any government should borrow if that borrowing is for investment and development and expansion of the economic space and increased national income. That's my take on that.
All right, Prof, thanks for that, and thanks for, the precise answers so far. But when the whole idea of the $1 trillion economy cropped up last year, part of what the government said was that they were creating an operating model and framework for economic and financial inclusion that will ultimately lead to the $1 trillion economy in 2030. That was last year. But then a few months after, that submission by the federal government, it turned out that Nigeria had dropped from being the economic giant of Africa, from being the country with the largest, GDP in Africa, giving way to South Africa, to Egypt, and to Algeria going ahead of us. And now we heard the Statistics Bureau and we had the Statistician General, saying that because the economy has now been rebased, it looks like Nigeria will soon be back on top, of the row. Meaning like what Jonathan did, I believe around 2013, 2014, when we rebased the economy and we overtook South Africa. It looks that will happen by the end of this month, according to the Statistician General. What are your thoughts regarding what people might think, in measuring the metrics that the Bureau of Statistics is using? This is the same organization that told Nigerians that unemployment rate is no longer more than 30%, but now it is barely 4-point-something% because,
I think
of course,
4%.
4% because they change how it is calculated. If you have worked for 1 hour in a month, even if you do not earn a kobo, you are considered to be employed. So the same organization is coming back to say that because of some giant strides in the marine and blue economy and a few sectors, there will be an announcement by the end of January, most likely putting Nigeria back, on top of the economic ladder in Africa. Is this something that we can trust? Is this useful for the projection of Nigeria for a $1 trillion economy, as we've been saying all along? Prof.
It is useful, but let's be calm so that we can disaggregate this thing very, very systematically. Now, that calculation that Nigerian economy was at this level, who made it? The recalculation that South Africa has overtaken us, who made it? You see, we developed a habit of picking figures generated by international platforms and trembling or dancing because of them, depending on how it is presented. You recall, I think within the last 2 weeks, there has been a pronouncement on Nigeria by J.P. Morgan. I'm sure you recall that. Now, when J.P. Morgan rates your nation, you are worried. But for me, I ask, who and what is J.P. Morgan? What does that organization represent? Where was J.P. Morgan during the 1989 global economic meltdown? Where was Southern Poor's? Go and check their recording, perception, and analysis and assessment of all the international platforms that collapsed. They didn't see it coming. Why am I going with this, or where am I going with this? It's important to note that the Bureau of Statistics also has a right to a position in the conversations about national issues. Now, concerning the rebasing, yes, I recall the debate about the 4%, but let's backtrack. At the time you're assessing the economy of a country, remember the job of the Bureau is to collect data, compile it, analyze it, assess it, disaggregate it as they affect economic issues, social issues, demographic, even environmental issues in the life of a nation. Now, in doing all of that, if, for instance, you assess the lives of Nigerians living in Lokoja in 1971, you'll see that most of the things going on in Lokoja today, nobody even knew about them today in terms of economic activities, the population. And when you have a totally different population figure, water demands will be different, the refuse clearing will be different. Now, imagine that we base our understanding of the GDP of Lokoja on the indices provided for us in 1971. We will not be dealing with up to 20% of the problems of that country, of that town. Why I'm going this far is for us to keep it simple and break down the whole idea of rebasing. Now, the MBS is saying is rebasing the economic profile of Nigeria, or the statistics and data relating to that going back to 2019. It says it's bringing in the digital economy, tech startups, and so many others. Now, you are assessing family income based on the jobs in the family. At the time you are assessing it, you're only thinking of the palm wine tappers, the farmers, etc. Meanwhile, some of your children are now working as teachers. Some of them are even working in cyber cafes. Some of them are doing painting, which was not there when you had calculated family income. Now, what MBS is doing is simple. It is taking into account all new sources of income, all new forms of social reality, all new facts pertaining to the sustainability, everything that impacts GDP in the country, taken from a date that is more current than the date on which it was calculated earlier. It's as simple as that. Imagine that you go somewhere and they're giving you data on Nigeria, what is used to calculate national income, petroleum, farming, and all of that. You don't see you don't see the banking sector, you say, who calculated this? So that's why I choose to keep it simple, to understand what the MBS is doing. Now, that's not quite the same thing as the one of, all of us were practically alarmed at that recalculation. So it's not that kind of arbitrary, oh, I see that and I think it is this. No. It is saying, look, we've chosen a date where you are capturing more of the things Nigerians are doing to earn a living, that it will give a more realistic image of the gross domestic product of Nigeria. That is correct. That's what I understand to be the rebasing to be about. If you did your calculation from, say, 2004, the blue economy won't be there. If you did it from 2004, much of the digital economy we have today won't be there. Much of the creative economy won't be there. If you did it from 1971, you wouldn't have a Nollywood. Those are income and job creating platforms that help determine GDP. And the MBS is saying, let's have a more realistic basis for calculating our GDP in today's world. It's that simple and straightforward for me.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'd like to touch on the role of financial inclusion in poverty alleviation, and then also learning from the past economic frameworks. One of the cornerstones of this administration's initiative is the enhancement of financial inclusion to combat poverty and spur growth. But when we look at how critical it is in this role, beyond expanding access to banking and credit, what concrete steps can be taken to ensure that financial inclusion directly contributes to lifting millions out of poverty and creating sustainable wealth? And then on the flip side, Nigeria has seen its fair share of economic blueprints and development plans over the decades, many which have fallen short.
Can I take the,
okay. Yeah, let's touch on that first.
Let me take the first you raised. So you bring on the other one, yes.
Okay.
Or financial inclusion. But before that, even just rounding up on the point I was making about NBS, let's know that the NBS is not sitting in an office and do calculations. It worked with MDAs. It's following recommended international templates, which require us to do the rebasing at least every 5 years. So it's all scientific. Now, coming to the matter of financial inclusion and being a little deliberately mischievous, you recall that during the Buhari regime, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs spent about 254 billion, but at least up to 200 billion feeding children who were in their parents' houses. So they were fed either by magic or witchcraft of virtual dieting. Now, that would have been Nigeria's greatest opportunity for financial inclusion. When that ministry claimed to have identified 40 million families that needed to be given money regularly to sustain themselves, rather than give them that money by cash, by hand, that would have been the ideal time to migrate 40 million people onto the digital financial system. It didn't happen. So I thought I should make those are tangential points. Now, financial inclusion is not about record keeping. If I'm able to get involved in the economy, I cannot get involved in the economy without some form of income. And so expanding the economic space is also in itself a form of inclusion. Now, in an environment like ours, it might actually be very helpful to find platforms that could be used as basis to drive financial inclusion for those who respect and relate to that platform or those platforms. Cooperative societies, even districts, even villages, the leadership and association structures that have been traditional to us. Now, all of these are still there. What I think should happen, and which is happening to some degree, if the banks include the efforts they are making in many local markets where they are getting some people who are afraid of the banking system, okay, every day give me 200 naira. I'll save it for you. By the time these people keep coming in 6 months, sometimes by the second week, enough confidence has been developed for the people to say, okay, I wouldn't even have known that I would have spent this money without knowing. Okay, tell me how your thing works. This requires diligence. And this requires that we should stop pretending that there's no government outside the federal government. State governments, local governments, councillors, council chairmen, ward chairmen, they are the structures for reaching the people and traditional institutions. The question for me would be, how could this cocktail of platforms be engineered to be looking in one direction, be engineered to have a contemporary understanding of financial inclusion such that they also become instruments for pushing it further? That would be genuine governance. Otherwise, we'll operate at the level of policy, at the level of what federal government has said or has put in place. We read about it, but that's purely at the elite level. As we are speaking now, for instance, the Nigerians, 98% of those we say we are concerned about are either in farms, in the market, at the bus stop, etc. But there are structures that reach them on a daily or weekly basis. Relating with those structures is a way of redomesticating them for national conversations, rather than allow them live their lives without even having the concept of the state, and then making policies and saying it is for them. I choose to take that broad view so that we see the extent of the disconnect between the desire for national cohesion and economic advancement and the reality of the citizenry we believe we are working for.
Thank you, Professor. Your reference to the virtual feeding definitely had me almost choking here in the studio. But if we talk about Nigeria seeing its fair share of economic blueprints and development plans over the decades,
Sorry, you had a second question.
Yes, that's the question I'm asking.
Okay, that
now.
is it. That's what you're developing now.
Yes. So when we look at these economic blueprints and the development plans that we've seen over the decades, many which have fallen short of the objectives that they started off with. As we start to wrap up now, to just put it holistically, what lessons from these past initiatives can we apply to the current framework to avoid repeating history? Are there specific pitfalls that the Tinubu administration should watch out for as it attempts to implement its strategy going forward?
I think so. The first thing is for the government to note that a blueprint does not translate into anything except it's implemented, and that it should work with a sense of history. From the beginning, we've always had national development plans, sometimes spanning 5 or 10 years, structured in such a way that you plan the activities you build over time to dovetail into each other to lead to progressive advancement in all spheres and holistically. Under Babangida, I think we got a rolling plan. The PDB came into power and launched the NEETS document. Fantastic document, which if it had been followed through to the end, would have by now transformed Nigeria into something else. Now that government was in place for 16 years. When Obasanjo left, Yar'Adua came on as president and introduced the 7-point agenda. The same government, the same political party, 7-point agenda. I don't recall any one out of it, not to talk of the 7, but these are the points to note. At the time this was being done, the major pillars of the NEETS audio package had been implemented, monetization. That's why the National Assembly quarters was sold off, etc. That's why it was provided that, look, if you're a minister, we'll give you your money for accommodation. It will be government responsibility. We give you your car. I was SA2 Minister of Information and National Orientation at the time, and we had no official car. We used our cars. Drivers were laid off. The cars were sold to them to start a life. Today, everything promised and delivered by the NEETS National Development Template has been completely reversed. Every government functionary has an official car, in addition to being given the money that should have made it not to have an official car or official residence. That's policy violation. Now, still within the same party, Yar'Adua left, Jonathan took over. Now, Jonathan came on to complete Yar'Adua's agenda. He was vice president. Then he introduced transformation agenda within the same government, within the same party, within the same. So you find that discontinuity will seem to be the logic and trajectory and, if you like, conviction and preference of governance. And I'm choosing this deliberately because it's one party. Now, Buhari came on. I'm not quite sure what he represented, beyond the fact that you'll see that his government concentrated maximally on consumption and distribution, nothing more, not development. Now, the government is coming up with a template. I think there are a few things they should watch out for. Number one, the integrity of the template itself. Number two, to remember that this is a time for legacies. Legacy not being the name of your agenda, but what you leave on the table. Number three, to pursue deliverables from budgets when they are made. Number four, to ascertain that the measures you're taking meet international standards and also meet domestic viability standards. So we've seen it, no matter how wonderful the template, unless it's followed through with measurables. Don't tell us, as we've been hearing over the years from various governments, oh, you know, the Buhari government spent so amount on roads. That's not what we want to hear. We want to hear that people can now move around on good roads and at less cost. So government communication in that regard will also then carry a more of a human element than infrastructure and financial figures announcement. So yeah, the template on the table should be guided by the past, with the government saying to itself, look, it mustn't be like this man's own who did not deliver. It mustn't be like this other man's own who tried to deliver but sabotaged on the way. Our own must last. The things we say we want to see, we must see. That means that every 3 months, every 6 months, we give a report card to ourselves on the key performance indicators. With that, I believe that they will pull off whatever it is they are working on in that regard.
All right, brilliant, useful submissions there for the government of the day to make use of. Thank you so much, Professor Ikechukwu, for joining us on the morning show today. Thank you indeed.